ahead and move on to item number 10, which is a public hearing for mitigated negative declaration, tentative map, conditional use permit, and a hillside development permit, as well as a zoning variance for the project Terrazzo. It is an ex parte disclosure, and before I have commissioners do their individual disclosures, I want to let the public know that at 2:30 this afternoon, we did have a field trip to walk that particular site. All commissioners were present with the exception of Commissioner Crocker and Commissioner Dipple. We walked that site with members of staff, members of the applicant team, and several members of the Fountaingrove Club, so that we could get an on-the-ground perspective of what this particular development will look like. So with that, individual ex parte, anything else to disclose?
Nothing else to disclose.
Okay.
Nothing else to disclose.
Okay.
Nothing else to disclose?
Nothing else to disclose.
And I also have nothing else to disclose. And we didn't receive any new information other than what's in the staff report. So with that, I'll turn it over to staff. Patrick Streeter with the staff report.
Thank you, Chair Cisco, members of the Planning Commission. The item before you is the proposed Terrazzo at Fountaingrove residential development. The project includes a tentative map for 19 residential parcels as well as a common lot, a conditional use permit, which is a requirement for any development in the Fountaingrove Ranch Plan Development Area, a hillside development permit, which is required for any project that proposes development on slopes that exceed 10%, a zoning variance for a change to the standards that are implemented through that hillside development standard requirement, as well as a mitigated negative declaration pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act. The project proposes 19 units that would be divided into two separate segments. On the lower elevation portion of the site would be the lower village, which would include 10 attached units as well as 2 detached single-family units. And on the upper elevation portions of the site would be 7 detached single-family homes. The project is located off of Fountaingrove Parkway in northeastern Santa Rosa in the Fountaingrove district. And the project site is currently undeveloped with significant stands of native oak trees. It's surrounded on the north, south, and west by the Fountaingrove Golf and Athletic Center. And to the east is Fountaingrove Parkway, as well as single-family residential developments beyond that. The project would be accessed through the Fountaingrove Golf and Athletic Center at the club's main entrance, or Fountaingrove Golf and Athletic Club, excuse me, through the club's main entrance, which is at the intersection of Fountaingrove Parkway and Stagecoach Road. So this is the view currently from Fountaingrove Parkway, right where the club has access to its maintenance facilities, and the site would be developed on this oak-covered knoll directly in front of you. And this is also the view from within the club, from the pool and athletic area. So some history on the project. In May of 2009, a neighborhood meeting was held to introduce neighbors to the project. No one attended that meeting, and later that month, an application was received by the city for a proposed development with 55 units. 19 would be on the upper portion of the site, and 36 would be on the lower portion of the site. In February of 2011, that proposal was revised. It would now include a 66-unit condominium, which would be entirely located on the lower portion of the project site. In March of that year, a neighborhood meeting was held at the club. There were about 150 people in attendance, and later that month, the project was a year later, the project was withdrawn prior to the scheduled public hearing. In January of 2015, a neighborhood meeting was held to introduce a new revision of the project. There were about 45 people in attendance, and it should be noted that the staff report erroneously dated that meeting as January of 2016, so it was 2015. In February, the revised application was received by the city, and the 66-unit development had been reduced to a 19-unit development. That's before the commission today. In February of this year, the project was further revised to preserve more of the open space. This would include some open space easement areas, And this involved clustering of the units, which was in conflict with some of the setbacks required by the hillside development standards. So at that time, a zoning variance application was also received. In June of 2016, an initial study was prepared for the project and circulated to state and local boards, as well as posted for public comment. And the project was scheduled to go before the Planning Commission in July for a public hearing. That meeting was continued to a date uncertain to allow additional time for staff to prepare the staff report, and it is now before you this evening. The general plan for the area is a Parks and Recreation designation. The general plan has a subcategory for special purpose parks and facilities, as this project would be one of those that accounts for golf courses and resorts. And the general plan specifically calls out this property as being part of a resort. The zoning that implements the general plan is part of the Fountaingrove Ranch Plan Development. It's a plan development district, which is essentially custom zoning for certain areas of the city. The policy statement identifies this area as a resort and golf course area, which has the intent of developing a resort complex that would act as a destination within the city. The policy statement and that land use does allow for condominium and other ownership resort units permitted up to a maximum of 400 units. And the development standards for parcels within this land use area would be set as part of the conditional use permit that's required. It should be noted that the project will have a requirement within the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The CC&Rs for any homeowners would have to be members of the club, so it would essentially be acting as resort housing. The original land use map that's included in the policy statement, again, identifies the area of the project site for this resort golf course land use. And it's also worth noting that even though Fountaingrove Parkway was undeveloped at the time of this creation of this map, it does identify the intersection of Stagecoach Road and Fountaingrove Parkway as the entrance to this resort golf course area. The city requires any development on slopes that are greater than 10% to apply for a hillside development permit and are then subject to hillside development standards. The project site, as highlighted here, involves some pretty steep slopes, which are indicated with the red, and slopes that are over 10% are indicated with green, and the slopes that are under 10% are indicated with white. So as the map shows, the site has a relatively flat portion towards the top of the knoll at the higher elevation on the north, as well as towards the bottom of the hill on the south end of the parcel. So the project proposes development, as was mentioned earlier in this report, to be clustered into these two flatter portions of the site. So the 7 detached units up on the top of the hill, and then the 10 attached and 2 detached units down towards the bottom. There's an existing maintenance road that runs through much of the site. That would be retained and improved to provide the main circulation for this project development. And as was mentioned, the residents would enter and exit through the existing connection between this maintenance road and the Fountaingrove Golf and Athletic Club. Towards the northeast of the site, an emergency vehicle access easement would be provided. That would be controlled by an Opticom-controlled gate, so it would exist for emergency vehicles but not for regular residential traffic. And a pedestrian path connecting to the existing sidewalks along Fountaingrove Parkway would also be installed at that location. The hillside development standards require a project to minimize alterations to the topography and drainage of a site, to be graded in a respectful nature to the natural features, and to avoid cutting into the hillsides in a visually prominent way. And the staff finds that the project abides by those guidelines, in that the development is clustered closer to the flatter portions of the site, that utilizes the existing topography while still achieving its desired density. And through the use of the open space easement management areas, it's able to preserve much of the vegetation, including the native oaks, which in addition to ecological benefits also acts as screening for privacy and preservation of view sheds, both for future residents of the site as well as residents and users of the surrounding land uses. These are visual simulations that were prepared for the project. There are no before shots, so these are all after shots. So the image on the screen right now on the left is looking south from Thomas Lake Harris Drive. So on the north of the project site, there's some residential development, and then this is Thomas Lake Harris looking south, where you can see the ridge line of the proposed project. The view to the right is the view looking southwest from Fountaingrove Parkway. So if you were traveling from Thomas Lake Harris south on Fountaingrove Parkway, this would be the view out of the right side. The view on the left now is looking north from Fountaingrove Parkway. So if you were heading up Fountaingrove Parkway and looking to the left, you would see this view. And view 3 is looking west from Fountaingrove Parkway, directly adjacent to where the project would be developed. So this is the eastern elevation of the 10 attached units in the lower village portion of the site. So as was mentioned previously, the project would be clustered onto these two flatter portions of the site, and extensive landscaping would provide screening and preservation of the native vegetation. The project requires a zoning variance. As was mentioned previously, part of the requirement of hillside development standards are a 20-foot front setback, as well as 15-foot side setbacks from any unattached developed structures. So the project, because of the clustering nature, is requesting a variance for the project structures that are on the upper village portion of the site, so the higher elevation detached single-family units are requesting a 12-foot, 18-foot, and 17-foot front setback, respectively, for lots 2, 4, and 7. So the garage would encroach slightly into that setback. And for lots 1 through 7, varied setbacks from 4 feet to 14.3 feet. So the variance would allow for encroachment into some of the setbacks that are otherwise required by the hillside development standards. The purpose of this is to preserve the hillside views as well as the vegetation, and it's based on the unique topography of the site. It's staff's determination also that the variance here does not change any of the required setbacks between the project parcels and any adjacent parcels. So all of those setbacks will still be maintained, and thus the project would not be interfering with the hillside development of those parcels that are adjacent to it. And in granting this variance, it would be upholding other features of the hillside development ordinance, such as maintaining view sheds, limiting grading on hillsides, and protecting native vegetation. The project had an initial study prepared in June of this year. The notice of intent to adopt an initial study mitigated negative declaration was posted with the state, the county, and locally. And that 30-day comment period began on June 27th of 2016, ending on July 28th. During that time, no comments related to the environmental review from outside agencies were received by Planning and Economic Development. Some of the issues that were looked at by staff included the traffic generated by the project and also ingress and egress from the site. It was determined that the project would generate a maximum of 182 daily trips, and that would have no effect on the existing levels of service along the subject study intersections as well as street segments. This is also including any proposed future development within the Fountaingrove area. So this project plus future development did not affect the levels of service in the surrounding streets. Also, it was determined by the traffic study that it would not be feasible to have the residential ingress and egress go through the current open maintenance curb cut on Fountaingrove Parkway. It would create a safety issue as well as a visibility issue because of the bend in the street and the speeds that vehicles are traveling, as well as the proximity to the existing signalized intersection at Stagecoach Road. So the traffic study found that the best means of entering and exiting the property would be through that signalized intersection at the main entrance to the Fountaingrove Golf and Athletic Club. The staff also reviewed for construction purposes. The club has requested that construction vehicles enter and exit through that maintenance access way, and staff has no conflict with that. The project would be subject to review by the city's traffic engineer as well as engineering and development services during the time of grading permits to show that it could be done in a safe manner, but there are a number of techniques that can be employed to allow temporary construction access to the site. But the main ingress and egress for residents would be advised to be through the club. Staff also looked at the existing vegetation on site, which is where the open space easement management areas came about. So these are areas that are preserved on site. They'll be privately owned open space. So there are easements that are laid down across the site which will preserve the vegetation, and no structures will be able to be built on them. So those will be protected to act as ecological preservation as well as screening for the project development. The project is also broadly identified as a ridgeline in the general plan, and the general plan does allow for development in ridgeline areas so long as it doesn't penetrate the ridgeline views, and it's done in a way respectful of the existing view shed. So the image that's on the screen right now is one of the visual simulations that was prepared, looking out at the ridgeline, and through the stepping of the architecture as well as the vegetation on site, staff finds that the project is respectful of the ridgeline and does not violate that general plan requirement. And lastly, the project will still be subject to design review, assuming it receives its land use entitlements. The design review board will also be looking at hillside considerations in addition to landscaping and project architecture. Several comments have been received from the public related to this project. In the previous versions of the project, most of the comments were related to the compatibility of the project with surrounding development, impacts to traffic in the Fountaingrove area, as well as impacts to the use and enjoyment of the Fountaingrove Golf and Athletic Club. Since the project was revised to reduce the number of units from 66 to 19, many of the comments have been related to the aesthetics and the privacy with the pool area, construction impacts of dust, noise, and visual impacts from construction, traffic safety along the interior drives of the club, loss of membership or revenue both during construction and post-construction from the impact that new development on this currently undeveloped site would have. There have also been several requests for story poles, which would be constructed on site to allow a simulation of what sort of views would be visible from various parts of the club should the construction take place. A number of requests have also been received for the item to be continued to allow additional time for members of the Fountaingrove Golf and Athletic Club to review the project. Staff has learned that several of the members of the club who were not within the noticing area, which was expanded for this project, but members of the club who are not noticed on this project have been looking at previous versions of the plan. So since it's been revised, there's only been since notice of this meeting has come out that members of the public have been able to review the currently proposed 19-unit development. And lastly, many of the comments received have said they are in favor of the development on the upper village portion of the site, so the single-family houses at the higher elevations, but opposed to the attached housing in the lower portions of the project site. So considering the fact that the project by staff has been found consistent with the zoning for the area as well as the general plan and meets all of the requirements of hillside development standards, assuming the zoning variance is granted, then it's the recommendation of Planning and Economic Development that the Planning Commission by resolution approve a tentative map subdividing a 7.5 acre into 19 single-family residential parcels and 1 common parcel. This is a long one. Approve a conditional use permit allowing a single-family detached and attached residential development with a density of 2.5 units per acre. Approve a hillside development permit and adopt a mitigated negative declaration for the Terrazzo at Fountaingrove project. I left out that staff is also recommending that the Planning Commission approve the zoning variance for the front and side yard setbacks for the upper village. And that concludes staff's presentation. Staff is available to answer questions. I know the applicant also has prepared a presentation tonight.
Any questions of staff right now? Yeah,
I do.
Vice Chair Stanley.
So Patrick, under the Fountaingrove Ranch policy, sort of what defines this residential resort use? You said something in your presentation that it was that they were members of the club, so that created this. Was that I read the policy and it didn't say anything, so it's sort of a vague reference to residential.
Yeah. So what's on the screen right now is pretty much as detailed as the policy statement gets regarding development. That would be an ownership development within the resort area. And so it does outline that condominium and ownership resort units are permitted, and it gives that maximum number of 400 units. So in staff's analysis of this project, with the units being entrance to the development would be through the club, and all owners of units would be required to be members of the club. So staff interprets that to indicate that these would be resort ownership units, which is not uncommon in a number of resort developments, that you'd have residential units that are under ownership and then subject to the rules and bylaws of the club.
And so under the Fountaingrove Ranch policy, what other uses could be used? You could put a hotel on that site? Or other commercial uses on that same site?
Yeah, so the policy statement outlines a number of different uses that could be within that resort district, and it's not parcel specific. So another type of use that would fit underneath those land use guidelines could be allowed on that site.
And then in your staff report, or in your presentation, you'd said, maybe I got it wrong, I thought you said that other than the front yard setbacks in the upper village, there were no other variance requests. I thought there were side yard setbacks too.
Yeah, front and side variance.
Front and side,
yeah.
but only
for the
only
upper
in the
village.
upper village.
Correct.
That's where I got it. Okay. And then in the noticing, there were questions about whether people outside the 500-foot area had been noticed, but I'm assuming the club got noticed?
The club was noticed, and
were their members noticed as part of the club noticing? Maybe that's not an answer.
That would be up to the club to make that determination, right. But the public noticing for this project was expanded far beyond the typical 400 feet radius, so it tried to encompass anyone within the view shed of the project.
Right. So what I'm trying to find out is, it sounds like that the questions came from members who may be 2 miles away,
right.
10 miles away, but if the club had been noticed, they could have noticed their membership.
That's correct.
And we just don't know whether that occurred, whether the club had done that.
Right, and it's not within city staff's purview
right.
to undertake negotiations between the club
sure.
and the developer.
Okay, I was just fine. Thanks.
Commissioner Edmondson.
I want to follow up a little bit on the policy statement question that Vice Chair Stanley just brought up. When I look at this, when it discusses permitted uses, it says hotels, motels, and similar transient habitation uses, including condominium or other ownership resort units. So are we just reading out transient habitation uses as applied to condominiums or similar ownership units, obviously?
Right. So our interpretation would be that condominium and other ownership units, when they are required to be part of a club, would be considered transient. They could be rented out to users of the club by the owner of the property, or people that were members of a club for a limited period of time, could be several years, would then move on somewhere else if they no longer wanted to be a member of that club. So it would fall under that definition. But we're not eliminating transient from that policy statement.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Any other questions of staff right now? Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Streeter. And is the applicant ready to make their presentation? Great.
Members of the Commission, Hugh Futrell. My firm is the property owner, the planning firm involved, and the applicant. I'm here with Kristen Kiefer on my staff, John Warden, the project architect, Dave Hansen, from Carlisle Macy, the project engineer, and Bill Mastick is either here, he's here, with Quadriga, the project landscape architect. Patrick's staff report, both written and oral, was very precise, very detailed, so I will try to keep my remarks as concise as possible. I'd like to talk a little bit about the history of the site, talk about some of the issues that have arisen, the nature of the collaboration that we've gone through over an extended period with representatives of the club, and then circle back to the regulatory context. In terms of the site context, Patrick went through that in considerable detail. I won't revisit that except to note that on three sides, the athletic club and golf course wraps around this, that there's residential uses beyond that, including the senior project, which is a medium-density project, as you know, and the single-family projects, which are further to the east across the Fountaingrove Parkway. I would also note, just for chronology, that our design work on this project began about 8.5 years ago. We've had, as you've heard from some of the project history, a variety of submissions that we've made, which have received a variety of responses, and a variety of revisions over time. Many of these revisions have taken a great deal of time to complete. This is actually the longest time period for any project that my firm has been involved in to get to this point of a hearing in front of the decision makers for the 37 years or so that I've been doing this. And there's reasons for that. That's not a complaint, it's an observation. The image up on the screen, again, is a site context. You can see clearly the upper village, the lower village, the large landscaped open space belts that separate the upper village from the lower village, and we'll get into more granular detail as we go along. And because my illiteracy means that I may hit the wrong button, let's see if I can make this go where it's supposed to. Which one is it? Is it page down? Okay. Yeah, and this is a further site plan that's immediately out of your packet. Now, in terms of the history of the site, there was an 80-unit plus project which was initially submitted that got revised to a 66-unit condominium project, which was a two-story condominium project over a podium with parking. That's now shown on the image up there. That is the project that went through the city process, through department referrals, was conditioned. A mitigated negative declaration was posted and circulated. An agenda report was prepared. Approval resolutions were submitted. It was agendized, and it had a staff recommendation for approval. That particular project had significant opposition from members of the club and ultimately from the club itself. We made the determination to suspend and then withdraw that application because our practice through many years has been to try to collaborate, reconcile, and resolve issues. We're certainly prepared to argue in front of you what's the best public policy, but in general, a more conciliatory approach is one as a matter of character and taste that we have typically pursued for many years. So we wanted to strike forward with the club and see if we could reach an understanding of what are the key issues and how we might modify the project. So I made a commitment to representatives of the club, who ultimately appointed a committee to represent the club to undertake discussions with me. I made a commitment to the club to approach this project with an entirely open mind, evaluate what in terms of siting, number of units, access, every issue that there might be, how we could revisit this freshly, and we did that over many, many months. And that led to an initial revision on the project, which did go through a club process. There's been a public process of meetings that's been identified, but there's also been a club process, and the club can, if it wishes, comment on that. It should be no mystery at all to club members that this project is before you, because there have been a variety of communications from the club to the members over many years. This is an elevation that shows that project that was on its way to you, and obviously a far more intense project. And now's the time to make an observation about the land use issues. Outside of the downtown, to my knowledge, this is the only site in the city of Santa Rosa that has no density limitation and no intensity limitation in terms of potential urbanization except good design and environmental constraints. There could be 100 units on this site if it could be well designed. There could be 200 units on this site. There could be a 100 or 150 room hotel on this site. There could be a timeshare project on this site. All that, as a matter of general plan and zoning, would be allowed. What we've ultimately ended up with is, from the regulatory context, is an extremely lower density than what the regulations would otherwise permit, and far lower, as a matter of fact, than what we submitted here that was on its way to you, having already cleared a mitigated negative deck, subject only to your approval, and it had a staff recommendation. Then we went through a process through our discussions with the committee in which I proposed reducing the number of units from that 66 down into the 40s, roughly a 50% reduction in density. And that in plan gives you an indication of what that project looks like. And throughout this project, by the way, John Warden, who many of you know well for his design work, has been an integral part of this, as has Bill Mastic and Carla Macy. The elevations also changed at that point to have a more single-family feel, even though nonetheless it remained an attached project. That project was presented to a meeting of club members who were invited to look at it. I presented it, and in the course of that, the question was posed to me. Is that the best you can do? We still have concerns. Can you go back and can you try to further deal with the concerns folks have about the lower village? The upper village has never been a topic of debate, and I'm spending nearly all my time on the lower village here, although I'll get to the upper village shortly for that reason. So we pursued looking at what could we do that could be economically possible, that might be a design that would have an even more beneficent impact and even less impact on the club and on the surroundings. And that led us then to this lower village design here, which you can see. Now, instead of an original 66, there are now 10 units in that lower village. You know, it may be arguable that given the city's need for housing, that's not necessarily the best public policy. And you know, many of you know my record in terms of producing housing at all price levels, and we do have serious concerns about the housing market in our community. But nonetheless, out of conciliation, collaboration, and compromise, we proposed the 66-unit project to become the 10 units that you see here. Now, although these units are technically attached at grade, they visually operate as a single-family detached product. Attached, yes, but visually essentially detached. Significant amount of parking, as you can see in the lower village. There's 9 spaces along the public street. Each unit has 2 covered spaces, 2 driveway spaces. So there is a total here of some 49 spaces, almost 5 parking spaces per unit. There's also 2 additional units now that have been put sort of around the corner there, as you can see at the upper part of the screen as well. That's essentially part of the lower village, but hasn't attracted much comment from club members. You can also see below in dark depicted what is intended to be a very intensive landscaped buffer between the lower village and the rec center. And Bill Mastic will talk more about that shortly. These landscape plans were discussed, submitted to the club representatives for review. My understanding is that the club likes what has been proposed here. We've also reached agreement that the club will provide water to us so that we can begin planting those immediately when any kind of construction work, site grading is ready to begin, so that there's as much of a head start as possible on that landscaping. And Whoops, let's go back. And before Bill comments about the landscaping, I'll also comment about this cross-section. This cross-section, which is through the center of the lower village, shows in profile one of the houses. These houses, by the way, are two-story step-down houses. They're never taller than 2 stories. They never be viewed by 2 stories. But like other step-down houses, way back in the back, it could appear to have like a 3-story element, but it doesn't really. That's the setbacks that occur, step-downs that occur, and you would never really have a view of that as being a 3-story element. The actual height limitation on the house from grade is under 25 feet in the lower village. What this shows is the landscape buffer in cross-section. It shows the location of the spa, and then it shows the location of the pool. Because of the grade differences in the landscape buffer, what goes on in the spa will be not visible. The spa won't be visible to any of the houses up above. The pool, edge of the pool is shown here at 147 feet from the edge of this house. The houses are located between roughly 50 and roughly 70 feet from the property line, depending on the exact house. So one of the things we've done since the original designs was pull these back even more significantly from that south property line. And we'll talk more about the pool momentarily. I'd like to turn this over to Bill Mastic just to talk about the landscape buffer. What do you need to do?
What if I jump slides around?
It's just the page up or down. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, my name is Bill Mastic. I'm with Quadriga Landscape Architecture. We're at 1212 4th Street. And as Hugh indicated, we've been working with him on this project, and John and Dave, for many years at this point. And this particular iteration is, I think, perhaps the most respectful of the athletic club, certainly in view of the amount of landscape that's been introduced, as well as the time that's been spent in developing this plan in conjunction with the club. Hugh asked me to speak a little bit about the condition that exists or is proposed between the pool and the structures here. And in this plan, we have at the very bottom of the slope, adjacent to, I'm going to move this thing hopefully in the right direction. Nope, wrong direction. There we go. There's a retaining wall that exists there, and that retaining wall becomes the edge. We have a slightly elevated condition, and progressing from the retaining wall back toward the homes, we begin with a tall hedge of native material called Pacific waxleaf myrtle, which we've used in this area on many occasions when we need something that's fast, dense, and evergreen. And that particular material we've used in this area, we've seen it grow from 6 feet in height, that installation from 15 gallon, 5 feet, to about 15 to 20 feet over the course of 3 years in certain situations. So it's a really fast-growing, thick, dense material that we think is very reliable. It doesn't require a lot of water. It is a native, and most of the material that we're using throughout this project, both upper and lower villages, are native materials and very water conserving. Our intent for the overall landscape for the project is to blend into the existing as opposed to introduce an ornamental level of landscape character or identity to the project. We're trying to work with what's there and embellish and enhance that a bit. But in this particular area, this is getting the most intensive landscape attention of any place on the property. And it is with regard for the views between the units and the athletic club. And what we're attempting to do is raise the horizon line off of the views from the second stories of these units so that we don't have direct line of sight to the pool, and particularly the spa in particular was the first concern, but buffering the view to the pool area as well. So in this particular section, which is just one slice, you can see that from the second story balcony of that particular unit over the hedge of the Pacific waxleaf myrtle, one can make visual contact with the pool. However, you can see beyond that line there is a small tree, and those again are native, and those will be introduced or interspersed along that area to further buffer those and fragment those views, so that the intent is that we're not only obscuring the direct line of sight to the athletic club, but we're softening and breaking up that elevation of the development from the opposite point of view. So we're concerned about both views. He would like to maintain a high view to the ridge lines and the hills beyond, and we're attempting to do that by keeping everything as low as we can while still respecting the sight lines and the desire for privacy and the sense of separation between the athletic club and these particular units. So the materials that we're using are predominantly native in this area. As he indicated, we can give a head start to a lot of this material. The large tree in this particular one is an oak, and that is not a fast-growing tree. There's just no way around that. But we can do a lot with the waxleaf myrtle. We can do a lot with the smaller trees, and we can do an awful lot with the shrubs and ground covers in that area, particularly if we get a head start on that. And we can further, we think we've got these things situated in plan view by bounce back to that particular view. We're showing these where we believe that we're doing the most good, in terms of creating that sense of separation, preserving that view from the second floors to the ridge lines beyond, and trying to find that balance point between the views from these units and the sense of separation between the athletic club. But we have the capacity to be able to fine-tune that as this project takes shape. If we were to install the waxleaf myrtle early on and let that get a head start, some of the additional materials between the houses and the myrtle, we can go ahead and fine-tune the placement and locations of those specific to window locations, sill heights, and other considerations that are difficult to perceive exactly at this point in the process. So that's our intent. We'd like to work with you and the athletic club as well in terms of fine-tuning the placement and the location of these materials. But we think the general composition as it's demonstrated here is pretty close to the mark. So that's where we stand on this at the moment.
These are other images from the site. Now moving to the upper village. 7 houses, detached, located on the top of the knoll to eliminate excessive grading and also to be sure that there's not excessive tree loss. This is where the variance comes into play. If we were to follow literally the setback requirements of the hillside ordinance, we would have to spread the houses out, bring them down the hill more, which would result in more grading and more tree loss. The hillside ordinance, literally written, doesn't have the flexibility to deal with this better solution to hillside development than what many other alternatives are. Someday I would expect the city will update its ordinance and provide greater design flexibility. But in the meantime, the variance process is the way to accomplish a superior design on the top. Visual simulations have already been referred to. The project has relatively little visual impact. I would also note that although this is technically a ridge line in the general plan, the surrounding ridge lines actually are higher around it, so you only get a typical ridgeline view under certain perspectives. From the site itself, you've got higher ridge lines around. We were actually rather surprised at some point to discover that a general plan map had shown a ridgeline kind of snake around here because it's actually a knoll that's below the typical ridge lines that exist in that area. However, it is technically a ridge line, and we've obeyed the policy in terms of not breaking the skyline. This again then is the basic site plan. I'd like to comment just briefly on some of the issues that have been raised, and then open for any questions. A number of different public comments have been raised on issues which aren't necessarily germane to the process, so I will skip over those. There's been a suggestion that there have been sudden changes to the project. In all fairness, if this is sudden, then it's a unique definition to the word sudden because it's been going on for a very, very long time. There's been a suggestion that someone was surprised that suddenly the setbacks had been moved to 35 feet. That's a misreading of the plan that someone did. The setback isn't 35 feet. There was a suggestion about story poles. This jurisdiction, like most others, over the last, well, it actually is more than 20 years old. It's been good 20 years before story polls were typically used as opposed to visual simulations. Story polls have various issues about them which have been identified. The visual simulations and the cross-sections are the best guide to what the visual impact is here. And then there is the big issue, of course, which is the impact of this project on the pool itself. We've done everything we can to minimize that impact with planting, by pulling the units back, by reducing the number of units that interface at all with the pool. But I also have to point something else out. This is a resort zoning. It is always assumed that there would be some kind of integral relationship between this housing project and the recreation center. The only way not to have any relationship is essentially to either remove the lower village entirely, which some have suggested, but which we're not prepared to do, or to eliminate half the units within the lower village, probably 5 units immediately in the center, which we're not honestly willing to do either. But I have to ask why. We've got 5 units there in which there might at certain times be a handful of people who might have not a view of the spa, because they won't have one, but at most a filtered view of the pool, a pool that is part of a club that they themselves are members of, at a time when around that pool there may be 5 times, 10 times, 20 or 30 times as many people around the pool who are looking close up at the people who are in the pool. What exactly is accomplished from a practical standpoint to believe that people in these houses who are pool members might actually have a filtered view of the pool that they themselves use and are members of? I don't follow the logic of that, either from a land use standpoint, a regulatory standpoint, or a practical standpoint. I respect the concern, but there's no way I can find that it's a justified concern. Finally, I would note that we have spent an immense amount of time on this project collaboratively to try to solve every issue possible. We are consistent with the general plan. We're consistent with the zoning district. We're consistent with the design guidelines. We're consistent with good land use policy. We're consistent with the aims, objectives, and findings of the Hillside Development Ordinance. And we have embarked on an intense collaborative process that is now involved years worth of work to try to reach a project that is the most sensitive to all the reasonable concerns that everyone has expressed. This is the very best work that I believe that we can do, and I hope you approve the project. Thank you very much.
Any questions of the applicant right now, or wait till after the public hearing? Great, thanks, Mr. Futrell. Okay. This is a public hearing item. I have a number of cards on the item. So I'll be opening the public hearing and calling you up. Because there's so many cards, I think what I'm going to do is I will call the first name and then call the second name and ask that you queue up to a microphone, be prepared to speak. How this works is please come to a microphone, restate your name for the record because I frequently mispronounce it. Keep an eye on our little light system. It'll go from green when you begin. You have 3 minutes. As you get closer to closing in on the end of the 3 minutes, you'll see a yellow light, and then when the red light comes on, a buzzer will go off, and I'm going to ask you to stop. I'm a pretty strict timekeeper, so please try to really keep your comments within that 3 minutes, because then I have to interrupt you, and your thought gets kind of lost in that process. Okay, so with that, we'll go ahead and begin the public hearing. I'll open the public hearing and begin with Margaret McNabb, followed by Hardy Soderholm.
Chairman Sisko and Planning Commission members, thank you for allowing me to speak. Please bear with me. I'm not accustomed to speaking to all of you. My husband and I are members of Fountaingrove. We live several miles away in the Hidden Valley area of Santa Rosa. I just want to start with a comment that I heard earlier. Lots of talk about Fountaingrove being a resort. So I just wanted to clarify that it is a member-owned club governed by a board of directors, which is elected by the membership. It's a little different than a typical resort that we would think of where we go and stay a few days and leave. Secondly, my husband and I do live several miles away. We did not receive notice from the city regarding this project. When we did receive something from the club, it was less than 2 weeks before the hearing, and it was a short amount of time to prepare. I believe the Terrazzo project, as currently designed, will have a significant adverse impact on the club facilities and the membership at the club. I'd like to make 3 points related to traffic safety, which bears my previous statement. The intersection at Fountaingrove Parkway and Stagecoach is very dangerous, as evidenced by a significant accident that occurred there last week on August 31st, which tied up the intersection for well over an hour or more. When I left the area, there was fire trucks, multiple law enforcement that were doing traffic safety, moving us around. There was a flatbed tow truck. There was people standing around. There were people clearing the intersection. So obviously something very significant had taken place. That isn't that happens somewhat frequently in that intersection, and I feel before any projects are approved that that intersection needs to be made safe. Left turn signals, whatever the traffic engineers would study, but to many of us that intersection is not safe. Secondly, the on-site circulation vis-a-vis the access roads in the club, particularly pertaining to adding more residences in there, building a residential development, is very awkward and very unsafe. The club has upwards of 2,000 users. Of course, not all there at one time. There's peak seasons.
Okay, Ms. McNabb, thanks for your comments. Appreciate your time. Next is Hardy Soderholm, followed by Thomas Schiff.
Afternoon. My name is Hardy Soderholm. Last year I received the Santa Rosa Open Space Volunteer Award. 2 years ago I received a Merit Award from the City Council for Community Enrichment. I love our city. In the opening paragraph, the Santa Rosa rules about rezoning states, the proposed rezoning request must be consistent with the city's general plan. In the general plan, this development land is zoned resort. This proposed rezoning is not consistent with the general plan. It will have a large environmental impact, significantly impact on the wildlife of the hilltop, safety, visual, traffic, noise, and adverse financial impact on the athletic club. It is my understanding that the general plan normally may be overridden when there's a social need, like low-income housing, senior housing, minority housing, or other public needs. What's the justification for this override of the general plan? Resort housing? I'm going to have to go home and tell my wife that we live in resort housing because we belong to the club. I don't think this is going to stand up in court. This is permanent housing for individuals, has nothing to do with resort housing. If there's a social need here, I'm sorry, Hugh, I think it's to increase your pocketbook. There's not a social need to override the general plan. Please do not approve this rezoning. It is incorrect. I don't think it'll stand up in court either. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Soderholm, and congratulations on both your awards. Thomas Schiff, followed by Nancy Hall.
My name is Thomas Schiff. I am a more recent resident in the Santa Rosa area. My wife and I moved here last year, became members of the club. In, I believe it was July, I asked for information from the club on this project and was sent some information. And subsequently, in the last several weeks, in communication with some members and was given contact from Mr. Streeter, it became apparent that the information I was given was not the current information. It was incorrect. Mr. Streeter asked me where I got it from, and I told him that I received it from the club, and I never did receive. The only correct information I ever received was from Mr. Streeter. I am concerned about, and I don't have the history, obviously, that everybody else has here, but the traffic and the road conditions and the ingress and egress to that club, and for increasing even more traffic, is a big concern. It is. We are very careful going in and out of the parking lots now because of the way the traffic goes across the entrances and exits to the parking lots. And if there's going to be even more, that is a big concern. The landscaping for the lower village, I did note what I saw on the monitor with the measurements. What's drawn in there is probably twice the size of what's I heard was going to be planted just today. They talked about 5 and 10. Well, if you looked at that drawing, you'll see where the 20-foot marker is, and you'll see those trees that are blocking out some of the views are probably twice that. And I don't know how many years that takes to grow. If it's an oak tree, obviously it's going to be 100 years, but I'm not sure that that's a good representation. It does seem to me, probably as Mr. Hardy Soderholm pointed out, there's an awful lot of bending of the rules to make this fit under your plan requirements. And how that came to be, I don't know. It predates me. But I did suggest to Mr. Streeter, and I would suggest to you, the use of story poles. Other communities have been using it for 20 years. And what it does do is give people suddenly a realization of what the envelope of some of these things and the impacts would look like. And versus visual presentations that you've received, I don't think you get the same visual impact at all. And there's a lot of communities that do use it, and they do use it for good reason. So again, I think the traffic is a big concern. I think the imposition that close. In fact, I don't know if they looked at moving the village to the other side of the ridge. I don't know if that's been looked at, but that would be a consideration and wouldn't even overlook the athletic club or the pool. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, and we don't allow clamping in here, so if you agree with this speaker, just raise your hand. That gives us the visual so we know that you appreciate what was said, but we don't have clapping or boos or anything. So thank you for that. Next is Nancy Hall, followed by Lois Nagel.
Yes, my name is Nancy Hall. My husband and I moved to Fountaingrove and joined the athletic club just about a year ago. Although there have been previous reductions to the Terrazzo project, the scope and the impact, in our opinion, is still too big. The lower village will dominate the Fountaingrove Golf and Athletic Club pool. 3 living levels, it may be 2-story, but it is 3 levels of windows in the diagrams, of attached homes spanning the length of a football field or more, and located just over 50 feet, or at about 50 feet from the fence line, will forever ruin the desirable, serene, open space environment of the pool complex. There will be unhealthy conditions during construction, including noise pollution, diesel fumes, and dust clouds. I've personally lived through this in a construction project near another pool in Bay Club and Redwood Shores. It's not a good thing. The invaded feeling of the completed project will chase away current members and deter new members, impacting the Fountaingrove Golf and Athletic Club financial viability. Communications have been inadequate. The city may have lived up to the letter of the law, but not the spirit of the law. Specifically, I'm citing the blue sign on Fountaingrove Parkway. You can't read that unless you park your car, get back out, and walk up to it. As I understand, there has not been a public forum on this project since January 7th of 2015, where the plans could be reviewed by a large group. The Fountaingrove Golf and Athletic Club communications are at a minimum disappointing. It's just too little and too late. The lack of member awareness on the issues has lulled many into a sense of complacency, and that's added to because of the number of years this has been going. No visuals were distributed or posted until last week, and the plans dated 10/14, as Tom mentioned, were handed out as late as July of this year. I might just add quickly that Dan Stewart and I had a phone call with another member, and on July 20th, he told me that the plans I was looking at on 10 of 2014 were the most current. Agreements to mitigate the impact were communicated on Sunday of Labor Day weekend. After a brief review, we don't feel that these are favorable to the Fountaingrove membership or the community patrons. We're also concerned with safety. Residential traffic, large vehicles, and small private roads with pedestrian and children are dangerous and inappropriate. Emergency vehicle access, we feel, is challenging, and I was asked by a fireman who had a conflict with back-to-school night to mention that. To summarize, the proposed Lower Village will destroy the current ambiance of the Fountaingrove Golf and Athletic Club. We urge the city to deny the proposal and request a further reduction for a few large homes on the hillside, on the top of the hill. We strongly request story poles for the Lower Village to be mounted to communicate the current plan, and we ask that you defer a decision until we can all take a look at this more carefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hall. Next is Lois Nagel, followed by James Miller.
Hello, my name is Lois Nagel, and I have lived in Sonoma County since 1981. I worked outside of the county for 38 years and am now retired and can finally be part of our community. I am a volunteer in the Santa Rosa City Schools and also with St. Joseph's Healthcare. I am at Fountaingrove 4 days a week. The pool is my oasis. I have made many new friends at Fountaingrove, and as a retired person, that's pretty special to be making new friends. Some members are naive to what this project will do to our club, but to those of us who do know, we strongly oppose. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next is James Miller, and Mr. Miller is followed by Gary Foss.
Good afternoon. My name is James Miller. I'm here to address the financial impacts that this project could conceivably have on Fountaingrove Golf and Athletic Club. Specifically, I gave the Commission the projected budget for 2016 that detailed the fact that membership dues from the athletic club were approximately $1.2 million. The club is currently operating at a loss of $190,000. Most of that is due to required maintenance that is being deferred. That required maintenance is being deferred allows enough free cash flow to keep things running, to keep money in the checking account, whatnot. I'd like to point out that the impact of taking, say, 15% of membership loss at the athletic club would result in free cash flow going down by $180,000. Because free cash flow was projected at $176,000, that puts the club into a negative cash flow situation. Negative cash flow for a business is bad news. The way I look at it is adding 12 homes to this lower area and potentially impacting the viability of a club that serves over 2,000 people, that employs over 140 people, that uses outside businesses that stimulate the local economy. I can't see how that sort of financial threat to put in something that'll allow homes for 50 people, I don't see that as good planning. I'm sorry. I ask that you deny this project request. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Gary Foss, followed by Randy Zillier.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and members of the Commission. Thanks for the opportunity to make some presentations on points that I think need to be clarified and need to be brought out. One, 2008, an agreement was signed, which was a grant of easement. If all of this was on the table at the time, or any of the things in between were on the table at the time, I doubt seriously whether the board of directors of the club would have approved that easement. I'm not sure what was said, what was done. I wasn't here. I've only been here for 2 years. It's a wonderful city, and I came here for all the right reasons, and I'm only 5 minutes away from the club. But this project, is seriously going to impact the quality of life around that club. If it was in reverse, I wonder what it would be like if we were trying to build the club with those houses there. Whether or not we would get the same accolades and reception, or have the same problems that they are having. They've done a great job. I have no quarrels with what they've done with the project, but I'm sure that it started out with the top part to get the grant, the agreement for the easement. That easement's very complicated. There's a lot of things in that easement that I don't know whether they have been done or not. Consultants were going to be hired to take a look at new entrances into the project. I don't know if they have done that and whether that's on a table, whether the members have had a chance to look at that. I, for one, as a businessman, would want to make sure that all of the details that are in here have been complied with and have been vetted out to the members of the club. In addition, this is binding. There is no option. But there is mediation and arbitration in here to reconcile differences. This all goes back to this project wouldn't be on the table if it wasn't for that easement. I think that needs to be revisited. I think the club members need to take a look at it and all the issues associated with that. I think we need time, and I know they hate to hear this because they spent an inordinate amount of time on it already. But this is usual in this kind of business. When it comes to the community, when it comes to all of us having a quality of life, you're going to get these you hear it all the time. It's part of your business. So I don't think it's abnormal to push for extension, to vet the issues and make decisions in the best interest of all of us. We're not stopping the project, we're trying to facilitate a little better solution. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Foss. Last card I have is for Randy Cillier.
Yes, hi. I'm Randy Seeley. I've been a 20-year member of the Fountaingrove Golf Club. And also there's two different levels of membership at our club. There's golf memberships and athletic club memberships. So you've heard some of the differences from the speakers. But I served as on the board of directors for 3 years, and I was club president for 2 years. And basically, this project has been my life for the last 6 years. My first day on the board of directors was the day that the application for the Terrazzo project was filed at 83 units plus 9 grand a units. That was actually in October of 2010. It wasn't on the timeline you received. At that point, the project was extremely controversial, and there was one public meeting that had somewhere between 150 and 200 people there, and almost unanimously in opposition. In 2012, the revised application was at 66 units. The only difference between that project and the previous one was they took the buildings off the top of the hill. And there was a planning commission meeting, and some of you know, for March of 2012. And that meeting was canceled, as Mr. Futrell said, because of opposition to the project. But also, the club filed a very lengthy response to the negative declaration of environmental impacts, and we were willing to fight the club at that point. The last speaker, the easement agreement that he alluded to has actually been the thorn in our side since the start. That easement agreement allows access to this property through our club. This project is basically landlocked within our club boundaries. And it had that easement agreement basically, and we spent a lot of money to find out what value, whether we could challenge it in court, and we determined that really it was valid. But basically, I wanted to say that I was on the committee that that was appointed by the board after my term on the board ended, that met with Mr. Futrell over a period of actually close to 4 years in an effort to both reduce the density of the project and reduce the impact on the club. And I wanted to thank the developer for the willingness to basically discuss all elements of the project, including the density, the setbacks, the impact on the pool and everything. And basically, I think as a result of those negotiations, plus the fact that the housing economy has improved dramatically and 19 homes are now worth what 66 condos may have been worth, the project has changed. And I think that there are some side agreements with the club that in an effort to reduce the impact of all of these areas. But I wanted to say that the project is very different now than where it started out with. I'm not opposed to the project, nor do I support it. I'm neutral on it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Seeley. That's all the cards that I have on this item. If you don't have to have filled out a card. If you haven't spoken and you want to come down and speak, you can do that. You want to come down?
I just speak from here. I have a loud voice.
No, we need you in the microphone. Sorry. And especially since I don't have a card, if you'd state your name for the record for us.
My name is Tom Corey. I've been a member of the club for about 6 or 7, maybe 8 years. And I came tonight mostly just to listen. I had not seen the revision here. I did see the initial proposal and was absolutely, I thought it was horrible. Like the speaker who just retired here, the pool area is one of the places that's like an oasis for me. I love it there. And my biggest concern all along has been this 4-story thing towering over. That was revised, and like Mr. Seeley, the last speaker, I have mixed views about this. I'm probably neutral like he is. I don't radically oppose this. I think this is so much better than the original proposal, and I'm certain something is going to get built there, and it's probably not even economically feasible just to build 7 homes at the top of the hill, which would obviously be the best thing. But just from my own standpoint, I think this is an improvement over the initial plan. I still worry about all the traffic, but it's a lot fewer homes there than the one in the beginning. And I don't remember, the club sent out something, whether there's some agreement for this development to help maintain the road in and out of the club, because obviously it's going to get a lot more use. But I guess I'm probably neutral on it too. I'm not adamantly opposed to this, and I suspect if it passed, I could live with it.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Corey. Anyone else wishing to speak on this item tonight? Okay, I am not seeing anyone else rise, so I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing. And Mr. Futrell, would you like to come down and maybe respond to some of the concerns that we've heard? Might need Mr. Streeter to address at least one of them also, but...
In terms of traffic, as you can see in your packet, traffic study was done according to the city's specifications that evaluated the level of service not only for this project, but the cumulative effects of this project added to other foreseeable development in Fountaingrove. And there was no level of service issue. The amount of traffic within the Fountaingrove Club itself that will be generated by the project is relatively minimal. The economic analysis is not a public policy issue, and it's simply one person's opinion. I respect it, but it's one of those items that's not so germane. I would observe that in the course of the hearing, you did not, to the best of my knowledge, hear from anyone whose concern was not the relationship of the club to the project, that surrounding neighbors and others concerned about broader public policy matters that you would normally hear about and be concerned about have not been agitated about the project at all. Most of the comments are reflections of the concerns that are in the written commentary that you've received. And largely this goes back again to the question of whether there is something inappropriate with having some units whose owners are members of the club whose units may be 150 feet away from the pool, who may have, at worst, filtered views of the pool, that is in some manner a basis for not approving the project. And it's very difficult for me to see respectfully how that's a basis, noting that the number of people themselves who are at the club, using the club, around the pool at any given time is a multiplier, as I've said before, of any people who would be here that could see the pool even on a very reduced basis. But beyond that, happy to respond to any questions.
The only other thing that, if you wouldn't mind covering, you don't have to go through all the details of it, but maybe you could disclose a little bit about the history of how the easement came to be, the 2008 easement, for those that don't know what that was about.
There were a variety of easements that were negotiated with the club that included formalizing access, included utility easements, and a variety of other elements. Those were done because it was always well understood that there was going to be a project on this site. And that was true before my firm in partnership acquired the property, so that's not a surprise. Those who handled the easements at that time did so in good faith, with counsel who advised them along the way. And so the notion that there might be something odd about it or that it's somehow challengeable has been evaluated and rejected. And in any case, the status of those easements has not been questioned by the engineering department or by any other departments. And while there apparently is some ongoing concern that there's something kind of odd about those easements, the fact is there's nothing odd about the easements. They were negotiated between lawyers, and the project that's been built was always contemplated. It was never imagined when these were negotiated that this was a blank piece of property. It was, if anything, anticipated that there would be considerably more intense use than the uses you're seeing today.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then, Mr. Streeter, if you wouldn't mind just coming up and addressing Mr. Soderholm's issue about consistency with the general plan. He was mentioning a rezoning. If you could clarify what we're doing here today.
Sure. Yep. So as was mentioned during the staff report, the zoning for the area is part of the Fountaingrove Ranch policy statement, which was a blanket statement for a large swath of Santa Rosa up in the Fountaingrove area, and it broke down the different sections into different land use types. And so typically zoning implements the general plan. The general plan is for parks and recreation in this area, which does have that subcategory that allows for facilities and uses such as resorts and golf courses. So that resort is what is the part of the general plan that the zoning is implementing. And the zoning, as part of this policy statement, is identified as resort zoning. And as was mentioned in the staff report, resort zoning does allow for ownership type uses, which can be condos or it says other ownership uses in the description. So staff has found that this project is consistent with both the zoning and the general plan, in that by requiring membership and access through the club, these would be resort type units, as in their ownership units that are part of this Fountaingrove Golf and Athletic Club resort. So they're meeting that requirement within the zoning, and in that way implementing the general plan. So consistency is found both with the general plan and the zoning, and no need for rezoning or general plan amendment would be required of this project.
Okay, so we're not overriding the general plan in this instance. It's completely consistent. And then if you wouldn't mind, I know there are concerns about the construction impacts, and without going through the entire mitigated negative declaration, you could just generally describe how construction impacts are dealt with to protect those that are around it.
Yep, so the project was subject to the California Environmental Quality Act, which does require any type of impact that would be a significant negative impact from the project to be mitigated to a point of non-significance. And that involves both the operation of the completed project as well as construction of the project. And the mitigated negative declaration that resulted from the initial study looked at such things as fugitive dust and air quality, as well as noise concerns and even aesthetics, and came up with mitigation measures that would reduce those to a level of non-significance, Specifically regarding dust, there are a number of mitigations involved that require best management practice of construction sites, which includes laying down binders or watering sites to reduce dust from overflowing. The city has standard construction hours that it applies to projects, but there's also a noise ordinance that requires that construction not exceed that noise ordinance once it crosses the property line. So that's something that would have to be monitored on site with the construction management to make sure that that does not occur. And the mitigations are in place to restrict the hours that construction would occur as well. So it is a public document, so anyone from the public is welcome to look through the mitigations and see what would be implemented in the construction phasing of this project to reduce those impacts. It's typical practice with any construction site in Santa Rosa also to have a liaison on site that any neighbors or affected parties would be able to contact. I believe it's 24/7 to discuss the ongoing construction activity and whether or not it's causing a nuisance or a negative impact, and then it would be the responsibility on the part of the construction group to then adjust that and correct for it.
Okay. And then just lastly, we did have some individuals address the viability, financial considerations to the athletic club, and Mr. Futrell addressed that a bit, but could you explain what the city's involvement or purview is in those issues?
Right, so the city does not get involved in the economic feasibility of a private entity. So our regulatory authority basically applies to land use and our general plan. So it's not something that was assessed by staff, but the negotiations between the developer and the golf club would be part of the project's viability as well as their agreements with the club. So while that takes place between the applicant and the club, it's not assessed or analyzed by city staff.
Okay, great. Thank you. And go ahead. Commissioner
a couple of questions. There was a comment about the intersection safety, and do you know if the city traffic people have evaluated that intersection for left turn signals?
Mm-hmm. So the level of service was looked at both through the project's traffic impact report, which was prepared, and that also went through the engineering development services section of city staff, as well as our traffic engineering section. And so that would be any changes that would come about through that traffic study and through the city's own research would result in conditioning on the project. And so no nexus was found between the traffic analysis and any changes to that intersection. It was judged that the intersection currently is at an acceptable level of service, and through the development of this project, it would not impact that intersection, and thus no changes to the intersection would be required.
Okay. And also, I can't remember which document I saw this in, but I know I read a requirement about the units may be rented, but I think for no less than 90 days at a time. And so how does the club membership work with that? Is it transferable if you're a homeowner and you rent your unit out?
That would be a question for the negotiations between the applicant and the club. Okay. So I'll allow them to answer that.
Okay, thank you.
Before Mr. Futrell does that, any other questions of Mr. Streeter before we? Okay, great.
Club representatives were concerned that these could be turned into virtually permanent verbo type units, and so we've agreed as part of our agreement to incorporate a limitation on that, which essentially prevents long-term turnovers, of that kind.
But when the unit is rented for any whatever your agreement is,
well, I guess it could technically be rented on a permanent basis in the ordinary course of business, but that unit still, and the homeowners association is obliged to pay dues for all 19 units, and the occupants of all 19 would be members of the club.
Okay, so a renter who's there for 6 months would be a member of the club because the homeowners.
Precisely.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Precisely, yes. Subject, I would say, to the club rules, which they would be subject to the same way any other member would be.
Don't leave. We have more questions for you, Mr. Futrell. Commissioner Gronica has a question.
I'm not certain if this goes direct to you or whether it be to our attorneys, but both in the correspondence that's come through on this, as well as allusions to the various speakers who were at least speaking in opposition to the sightline issue with the pools. There's been mention of membership in the club. Do the owners, or say what would be the new owners of these 19 units, upon purchasing their home, are they then considered equity members of the club and then taking it on the opposite side of the fence, basically? Who speaks for the club, the general membership, or is it what do you want to call it, the board of directors? And if so, if it's the board of directors, are they equity members only? Because then I'll take it a bit further. So you ask, why the heck am I asking these questions? Assuming that the project gets built, say as presented or similar to it, and you've indicated, your landscape architect have indicated that you've done everything you can to create, in essence, a filtered view of the pool. If the club is not satisfied with that, what would their redress be? In other words, would they, equity members of the club, negotiate with you as a developer, or would they, in essence, negotiate with the 19 new homeowners who also are club members? To get to, if there were some resolution needed on this.
I think I can be responsive to that question. And I'm sure the general manager or president of the club, if they're here, will correct me if I'm saying anything improper. But the board of directors of the club represents the club members, and the general manager is responsible to the board of directors. There will be a homeowners association that is controlled by the 19 property owners. That homeowners association is responsible for maintaining all of that landscaping. It's also responsible for paying those dues, which will be collected as part of the homeowners' dues from each of the 19. So in that sense, there's a guarantee that these payments will be made. Within the athletic club itself, my understanding is there's not something called an equity member. There are equity members, but not simply in respect to the athletic club. What there are members. And the 19 people, households up in our project would be members, the same as the other hundreds of other members who have to pay dues. If those members fail to pay dues, then they're no longer members. In this case, the homeowners association will be paying the dues and collecting them, so that makes them quasi-permanent members, but it doesn't make them equity members. They're still subject to the same rules that everybody else is. Now, if it turned out that the landscaping was inadequate, our agreements do provide for a method of discussion throughout the construction period and thereafter between the club and the developer's successor will be the homeowners association. We will have an obligation, actually, under the approval that the city's given, that landscaping is supposed to be maintained. It can't just be willy-nilly pulled up and disappeared. That can't happen, and we even have agreements with the club that cover that, as well as things like what happens if there's dust and dirt that ends up in the pool because of what we do up on our site. We have an obligation to clean the pool. What happens if we do some damage in construction to the street or the curbs or the sidewalks? We're obliged to fix that. On a permanent basis, there's an ongoing joint maintenance responsibility between the homeowners association and the club regarding the entry road. In a very real and permanent way. There's an intimate relationship between the board of directors, the general manager, and the association, ultimately, initially the developer, but eventually the association and their own board of directors to work cooperatively on all these kinds of issues.
Any other questions of Mr. Futrell before we take this up? Any other questions of staff? Okay. You know, I'm going to ask that we do this very similarly to what we did a couple of weeks ago, because I think a number of these resolutions, I mean, they're critical to the project, and I think it makes it easier for the public to understand if we can just discuss the project under the mitigated negative declaration and then do sort of recap the various resolutions. So I'm going to suggest that we'll move the resolution for the mitigated negative declaration, but we'll open up the discussion for the variance, the tentative map, the conditional use permit, and the hillside development permit, so we can kind of cover everything in one swoop and then do the rest of the resolutions. So would somebody like to move the resolution for the mitigated negative declaration?
I'll move a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Santa Rosa adopting a mitigated negative declaration for the Terrazzo at Fountaingrove project located at 1601 Fountaingrove Parkway. Assessor's parcel number APN 173-670-024, file number MUP15-002. Waive further reading of the text.
I'll second.
Okay, so that was moved by Vice Chair Stanley, seconded by Commissioner Duggan. Vice Chair Stanley, would you like to start the discussion and include your opinions on the zoning variance, tentative map, conditional use permit, and hillside development permit? For starters.
Thank you, Chair Cisco.
You're welcome.
Well, I'll just start at the top. In terms of the resolution for the mitigated neg deck, I agree with the mitigated neg deck. I find that there are no unmitigatable impacts to the project. That isn't to imply that there aren't impacts from the project. I know I've heard a lot from the community that they feel there's going to be impacts to traffic and safety, and that's a byproduct of development. It's not necessarily something that stops development. So in terms of the MND, I think it was done well, and it showed that the impacts were mitigatable and have been through conditions of approval. Moving on to the variance, I'm gonna put that together with the hillside development comments, because I think they tie together. The reason you need the variance is because of the hillside development requirements that we have. And we've had a lot of discussion on this commission over the last year about hillside development and some of the unintended impacts, but also sometimes the design decisions that are made in order to accommodate concerns that are brought forth through the hillside development create other unintended consequences. So I think this development team, this entire team, did a very good job of trying to reduce the impacts to the environmental concerns, tree preservation, and using what has been a very big part of the Fountaingrove Ranch policy, which is clustering of buildings in order to preserve some of the natural features of that beautiful part of our community. It was never intended that when Fountaingrove Ranch policy was adopted by the city and council years ago that it would stop development. That wasn't the intention. It was that good development came in and was sensitive to the environmental issues, the beautiful tree groves and formations that are up there. I think this team did an exemplary job of trying to preserve that. The variance, again, so all the findings were met for the variance, so I am in support of the variance as well. The conditional use permit, this is the emotional part of development. Members have been looking up at the pool and seeing nothing there for years, and you get used to that. But it was obviously the easement that was put in place. It was never intended that that was going to remain that way forever. To be perfectly honest with you, I lament the loss of some of the units up there. We have conversations at this commission and at the council level on an almost constant basis about housing for all and using the development potential that is left in this community not to encourage growth, but to just accommodate what we have going on in this community right now. We do not have a huge growth component in this community, less than 1% on an annual basis, and we have a housing crisis. So I lament the fact that we are at a place where we've reduced that so significantly in a place where we could have done more. I'm not making a comment on the original. I'm simply saying you could have been looking up at that pool at a 200-unit hotel complex, and there wouldn't even be a question as to whether that was. The notion of whether this is residential or resort residential, the Fountaingrove policy is vague. Always has been. We rely on staff and legal counsel to inform us about interpretations of that, and I don't see it within my purview to question their legal finding of what resort residential is and whether that fits in. We are not overriding the general plan. We're here to ensure that this project is actually in alignment with the general plan and the underlying zoning. So the comment about financial impacts from this project, there's an it's implied that this will be a nuisance to the members of the Fountaingrove Athletic Club, and I find that those comments are more anecdotal than data-driven. I don't think anybody really knows whether this is going to improve, be neutral, or be a detriment to the club. And it certainly isn't within our purview to analyze financial statements and determine whether you guys are going to lose money or not. I think Mr. Futrell and his design team, and certainly John Warden, knows how to design projects in a very sensitive way. I think the screening that Mr. Mastic talked about, the screening of that project, he didn't say it was going to be 20 feet when you moved in. He said that he was planting the Pacific wax myrtle, which will grow to 20 feet within a few years. So development does have an impact. You will see that impact for a while, but eventually it will just disappear, like the smart train running through our town. I think that this developer has bent over backwards to try and accommodate the concerns of the community, to accommodate the concerns of the athletic club, and for all the reasons that I've stated, I'll be supporting this project.
Okay. Commissioner Flanagan?
I too will be supporting this project. Certainly read all the possible information that was given to us, and I will not repeat the previous comments because, however, I subscribe to them as well. Features that I particularly liked about the project, I have found myself over the last several years, especially on projects in the Fountaingrove area, being somewhat critical of the traffic studies and the impacts on Fountaingrove itself. I really like the fact that this is going to the main entrance of the entrance. Ingress egress will be taken through Stagecoach and Fountaingrove, and that you're going to be using, in essence, a private driveway negotiated to city standards, I would assume, as you develop your site. I was impressed in realizing it is an emotional issue for a good number of members that the Golf and Athletic Club, Fountaingrove Golf and Athletic Club, as it relates to the view of the swimming pool. But again, I think that the consultants, particularly the landscape consultant, is doing every possible thing he can to provide that filtered view. And I think I get it, that you're in essence trying to elevate the view this way as opposed to that way. It won't eliminate it immediately and not 100% in terms of view, but it will be far superior than it would have been with other developments up there. The only other thing that I wish to add at this point, it's a minor but an important thing, and it gets into the removal of the existing trees. And this is probably more of a curiosity, but in reading I think it was the mitigated neg deck, talking about the number of trees that are going to be removed and replaced by formula, it mentioned something like 30 bay laurel trees there that need to be removed, and you want them removed, since they're enablers of sudden oak death syndrome. And so I would just add that wherever possible, the greatest care of the removal of those trees to, in essence, eliminate the possibility of spreading that sudden death to existing and trees that will stay there, oak trees, important. So. Beyond that, I have nothing further.
Thank you. Commissioner Edmondson.
Thank you. I intend to support the project as well. Mr. Futrell made an observation that most of the comments that we heard tonight had to do with the impacts to members of the club in their use of the club. And those are valid concerns for us to take into account, and we have taken them into account with especially the conditional use permit. We're allowed and obligated to take into account the public welfare impacts and compatibility with neighboring property and existing land uses. But the club and its interests were always, I think, unusually powerful compared to other sort of land use contexts where neighbors can't as easily act in a united way. The club does have a board of directors that is responsive to the members and acts on its behalf. We've heard comments about the legal negotiations that went into the easement and the ongoing negotiations that have been happening between the development team and the club. And I think all of the preservation of views, intensity of use, all of those things were potentially negotiable in a business sense between these parties. And as a matter of proper land use and saying that we should be able to disturb the agreement that has been arrived at by the parties is not something that I think is warranted. I had a little bit of pause with the variance, but I am convinced that the clustering is very justified by the kind of unusual topography and the fact that we have two flats on this parcel that are essentially the only developable areas without a lot of grading or strange construction techniques. The developer, Mr. Futrelli, also made the observation, which is valid, that the intensity of use on this property could have been within the bounds of the building codes and the bounds of conditional use permit review, could certainly have been much, much greater than this project. That's not to ignore the fact, and I would go a little further than Vice Chair Stanley in saying that I think it is reasonable to realize that it's not as pleasant to have a view of homes, even very well-designed and attractive homes, as it is to have a natural setting that people have enjoyed for years. And I would share that view. But balanced against the property rights and the housing needs of this city, I think the parties have arrived at a very reasonable compromise. And I agree with the assessment of the environmental review. I think it's very well done, and I have no further issues with the project.
Okay. Commissioner Duggan.
Okay, I am supportive of the project as well. I don't have much more to add than what's been said so far. I do agree that the environmental document was very thorough and didn't leave anything open to question. The zoning variance, I can make the finding that it's appropriate because of the hillside ordinance and being able to cluster the homes and reduce the amount of grading required, and otherwise meet the requirements of the hillside ordinance was appropriate. So I can agree with the zoning variance. Also, everything else that all of our other resolutions, I think the design team has done a very thorough and exhaustive job, and I think this is a really good solution to what's out there, the topography and the landlocked nature of the site, and I think it's going to be a good project. And I do think the landscaping is going to grow up, and in a few years, hopefully, there won't be very much at all at issue for the club members. So I am in support of the project.
Okay. And I'm also in support of the project. Losing my place here. Again, it's been very, very well covered by the commissioners up here. I do appreciate Mr. Futrell's willingness to continue to work with the golf and athletic club, and then to come forward with what's a really very tight application that makes our job easier to have everything in place and to have the documentation so well done. The zoning variance is really integral to the hillside development permit. The findings can be made. I think it's a very well-designed project, and like Mr. Edmondson, I do understand what it's like to lose the view that you had, and yet that's what our land use policies are allowing up there, and I think it's going to be a very, very nice project, and you're going to get new members to your golf and athletic club, which I think will be good too. So I'm also in favor of the project. And with that, we did have a motion made for the mitigated negative declaration made by Vice Chair Stanley, seconded by Commissioner Duggan. So we can go ahead and vote on that. Your votes, please. And that passes with, that passes with 5 ayes, Commissioners Dipple and Commissioner Crocker being absent. And I need a little help with what the next one is, because I lost the titles.
I'll make a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Santa Rosa approving a zoning variance to allow encroachments into the required 15-foot side setback, 20-foot front setback for the proposed construction of 7 detached single-family residences within the Terrazzo at Fountaingrove subdivision located at 1601 Fountaingrove Parkway, Assessors Parcel Number 173-670-024, File Number ZB16-001. Waive further reading of the text.
Second.
So that was moved by Vice Chair Stanley, seconded by Commissioner Duggan, and your votes, please. And that passes with 5 ayes, Commissioners Dipple and Crocker being absent, and next is the tentative map.
Well, it's not loading.
You lost yours?
I lost it. Well, no, there it goes. Okay, I'll make a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Santa Rosa approving the Terrazzo at Fountaingrove tentative map located at 1601 Fountaingrove Parkway, APN 173-670-024, file number MJP15-002. Wait further reading of the text.
I'll second.
That was also moved by Vice Chair Stanley, seconded by Commissioner Duggan, and your votes, please. And that passes with 5 ayes, Commissioners Dipple and Crocker being absent.
I'll make a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Santa Rosa making findings and determinations and approving a conditional use permit for Terrazzo at Fountain Grove located at 1601 Fountain Grove Parkway, Assessor's Parcel Number APN 173670024, file number MJP15-002. Wait for the reading of the text.
Second.
And that also was moved by Vice Chair Stanley, seconded by Commissioner Duggan, and your votes, please. And that passes with 5 ayes, Commissioners Dipple and Crocker being absent.
I'll make a resolution of the Planning Commission of the City of Santa Rosa approving a hillside development permit for Terrazzo at Fountain Grove located at 1601 Fountain Grove Parkway, Assessor's Parcel Number APN 173670024, file number MJP15-002. Wait for the reading of the text.
Second.
Okay, moved by Vice Chair Stanley, seconded by Commissioner Duggan, and your votes. And that passes with 5 ayes, Commissioners Dipple and Crocker being absent. And I believe that concludes this item. And why don't we go ahead and take a 5-minute break while I pass the gavel over to Vice Chair Stanley and I exit the chambers.